Hey everyone, tonight we're going to start with a story. Nevada, 1965. Two young men drive out into the desert, wetsuits and air tanks in the back of their car. Their destination is a place called Devil's Hole, a pool of still water that locals whisper about. And as you hear this story, I'd love to know what you think. Would you call a place like this an adventure or a warning? Share your thoughts in the comments as we go, because half the fun of these mysteries is wandering together. At first glance, this desert pool doesn't seem like much. It's only about the size of a small swimming hole framed by rock and scrub. The surface shimmers blue under the sun, strangely calm, as if sealed from the desert winds. Around it stretches Death Valley, a land so dry and extreme that the sight of water feels impossible. That alone would be enough to make people pause. But this particular fissure is not like other watering holes. Locals knew it. Long before scientists came, long before scuba gear made it accessible. The two students who drove here that day were Herb Bottoms and Paul Giancontieri. They were strong swimmers, restless and curious, both drawn to challenges. For them, this was less about legend and more about testing themselves. They'd heard the talk. No one had ever reached the bottom. No one even knew how far it went. Some called it a portal, others a curse. To the young men, it was simply a chance to explore a place few dared to enter. They parked their car, pulled on their suits, checked their tanks, and eased into the still water. The sun beat down, the desert lay silent. Then they slipped beneath the surface. That was the last anyone ever saw of them. When they failed to return, friends sounded the alarm. Rescue divers arrived quickly. For days they searched the passages, mapping what they could, shining beams into the dark. They expected the familiar outcome of drownings. Sooner or later, bodies rise. Physics and biology dictate it. But here, the expected never came. Days passed, then weeks. The surface stayed quiet. The abyss gave back nothing. That's what made the story endure. It wasn't just that two lives were lost. It was the way they were lost, into a silence that didn't obey the rules. Even veteran divers admitted confusion. The cave system is complex, narrowing into tight side passages, dropping into darkness that sonar only half revealed. They couldn't say for certain where the tunnels led. All they knew was that two men had entered, and the earth had kept them. The tragedy made headlines. Local newspapers warned thrill-seekers not to tempt the waters. Nationally, the story added to Death Valley's reputation as a place of extremes, where nature itself seems tilted against survival. But for many, it was the mystery that stayed with them. Why no bodies? Why no closure? People speculated about side caverns, unseen currents, even connections to water systems far beyond Nevada. And for others, the old whispers resurfaced, that this was not just a pool, but a threshold. Long before wetsuits and headlines, the Timbisha Shoshone already held the place apart. Their traditions describe certain openings in the desert as doorways, not meant for human trespass. This one was among them. You did not drink from it, you did not bathe in it, you did not approach it lightly. It was respected, even feared. To them, the still water was not empty but alive, a reminder that some parts of the earth belong to something other than us. Modern science, in its way, has only added to the unease. This fissure is part of a vast aquifer system that extends for hundreds of miles beneath the desert. It reacts to earthquakes thousands of miles away. After a quake in Alaska, waves have been recorded sloshing against its walls. After tremors in Mexico, the water stirred here. Imagine standing at the railing, watching a pool in Nevada ripple in response to forces shaking the earth far beyond the horizon. It's hard not to feel that the water is listening to something larger than us. There is life here too, clinging against the odds. A tiny species of fish, the pupfish, survives only in this cavern and nowhere else on Earth. Barely an inch long, shimmering blue, it has lived here for tens of thousands of years, adapting to an environment that should be impossible. Warm water, limited oxygen, no exit. Yet the fish endure. Scientists puzzle over their survival. Visitors see them as another sign that this opening is different, a refuge for something fragile and ancient. Eventually the government stepped in, citing the need to protect the endangered pupfish. The site was fenced, access restricted. On paper, the decision was biological. In practice, It added another layer of boundary. A fence always speaks a silent message. Beyond here, you do not belong. Standing outside the bars, peering into the blue water, you can feel it. The desert is vast, open, endless. But here, at this small hole, you are stopped. And maybe that is as it should be. The story of the missing divers never faded. Most tragedies become footnotes. This one became legend. It matched the feeling already attached to the place, that it was not governed by ordinary rules. When the bodies never returned, it seemed less like misfortune and more like confirmation. The abyss had claimed them, and in doing so, revealed its nature, and it isn't alone. Across America, stories of bottomless holes crop up wherever land dips into darkness. In Missouri, settlers spoke of the Devil's Well, a cavern filled with water so deep no rope could find the bottom. In Maine, another Devil's Hole was said to swallow logs endlessly. In Washington state, a modern legend called Mel's Hole told of a well that devoured anything thrown into it, a story that captivated radio listeners in the 1990s. Some of these are folklore, some are real places, but all circle the same idea: a hole without end, a place that doesn't give back. Why do such stories repeat? Psychologists suggest that thresholds, cliffs, caves, deep water trigger both fear and fascination. We are drawn to edges, even when they frighten us. The unknown below is terrifying, but it also compels us. That's why people peer over cliffs, why children dare each other to look into dark wells, why divers strap on tanks and slip beneath still surfaces. Curiosity is as strong as caution, perhaps stronger. That paradox explains why the 1965 tragedy still haunts us. Those young men weren't reckless. They were answering an ancient pull, to descend to see what lies beneath, to test themselves against the unknown. The pool kept them, and in that keeping it spoke to the rest of us. It reminded us that the abyss does not always return what it takes, and that is where our journey begins, with a modern story that echoes the oldest of human habits, to stand at the edge of a hole and feel both dread and desire, to imagine what lies beyond even if we never cross the threshold. This opening in the desert is not unique. It is part of a larger pattern, one we'll explore as we go, of shafts, pools, and chambers that resist explanation, that invite us closer even as they warn us away. But for now, stay with this image. A quiet pool under the Nevada sun. Two divers slipping below the surface and never returning. A people who long before said, "Do not disturb it." Scientists who admit it stirs when the earth shakes a continent away. A fish that survives here and nowhere else. Different voices, different reasons, the same conclusion. This is not ordinary water. This is a threshold, and thresholds then and now demand respect. If the Devil's Hole shows us how nature itself can unsettle, then what lies beneath the surface of human history is just as strange. Because across the world, in places where we expect simplicity and roughness, we find shafts, boxes, and chambers carved with a level of precision that seems centuries ahead of their time. These places don't just raise questions about engineering. They force us to wonder why so much care, so much accuracy, was poured into spaces no sunlight would ever reach. Egypt is where the strangeness begins most clearly. Everyone knows the pyramids, vast triangles pointing toward the sky. But beneath the same plateau lies something quieter, harder to photograph, but perhaps even more extraordinary: the Osiris shaft. On the surface it looks ordinary, a hole in the rock, long ignored. But in the late 1990s, archaeologist Zahi Hawass finally led a team down. The descent was treacherous. Vertical drops, slippery ledges, stale air. They went level by level, 3 in all, until they reached a final chamber more than 100 feet down. At the bottom, water. Still, silent, unchanging. There is no aquifer in this bedrock, no underground river to explain it, yet the chamber remains flooded, as if the earth itself insists on keeping this pool filled. But it wasn't the water alone that caught attention. Engineers studying the shaft marvelled at its geometry. Across its full depth, the verticality deviates only by fractions of an inch. That's a kind of accuracy our laser-guided drills struggle to achieve, and yet archaeology tells us it was cut 4,000 years ago, with copper chisels and stone hammers. If true, then the patience of those workers was almost unimaginable. And still the shaft is here, straight as a line drawn from sky to underworld, a silent rebuke to the tools we assume the past possessed. The mystery doesn't stop there. At Saqqara, not far from the Step Pyramid, lies another subterranean enigma, the Serapeum. Buried beneath the sand is a warren of tunnels that contain 24 granite boxes, each carved from a single block of stone. They weigh up to 100 tons. Picture dragging such a mass through narrow passages without modern cranes. Difficult enough. But inside those boxes lies the real puzzle. Their walls are flat to tolerances finer than aerospace standards. Their corners are perfect right angles. Their interiors polished until they reflect light like mirrors. The accepted explanation is that these were sarcophagi for the Apis bulls, sacred animals of immense importance. And indeed some bore inscriptions linking them to bull cults. But the precision goes far beyond what was necessary for burials. Engineers who measured the boxes with modern tools admitted shock at their accuracy. Christopher Dunn, among others, found tolerances tighter than what we achieve in factories today. If the goal was simply to honour animals, why carve containers so exact that they would impress engineers 4 millennia later? Early explorers like Auguste Mariette, who first cleared the tunnels in the 19th century, wrote of their astonishment at seeing massive lids fitted to boxes with joints so fine you could barely slip a blade between them. Some boxes were left unfinished, rough on the outside but flawless within, as if all the care had gone into making the hidden interior perfect. Standing in those galleries today, running your hand along stone so flat it feels unnatural, you sense that precision itself was the point. Not just devotion, not just function, but exactness as offering, or perhaps as mechanism. Cross the sea and the centuries and you reach Malta. In 1902, workers digging a cistern for new houses broke through the rock into darkness. At first, they thought it was just another cave, but as they explored further, they realised they had stumbled upon a vast underground labyrinth. The hypogeum of Halsaflieni revealed itself slowly. Halls, stairways, niches, carved more than 5,000 years ago. Entire levels of the complex had been sealed off, filled with rubble, perhaps deliberately. When archaeologists entered, they found not only chambers, but also hundreds of human skeletons, some of them strangely elongated. But what sets the hypogeum apart is sound. In one chamber, the so-called oracle room, a simple word spoken aloud transforms into something physical. The stone carries it, deepens it, sustains it. Acoustic experts measured the resonance at exactly 110 Hz, a frequency now known to shift human brain activity, nudging perception, stirring emotion, even producing trance-like states. Visitors report feeling vibrations in their bones, a tingling across the skin, a disorientation that goes beyond normal echo. It's hard to imagine this was an accident. The chamber's proportions, curved walls, rounded ceilings, all seem tuned to this effect. And Malta is not alone. In Ireland, Newgrange carries similar acoustic properties. In Peru, the site of Chavin de Huantar contains galleries where conch shells, blown like trumpets, produce low tones that reverberate eerily. In Mexico, claps at the base of certain pyramids echo back as the cry of sacred birds. Again and again, across continents, we find architecture tuned to sound, and always in spaces linked to ritual and the underground. Were these resonances meant to create altered states in ceremonies? To enhance trance? To bridge the human mind with something larger? Or were they the byproduct of a lost science of acoustics, rediscovered again and again by cultures separated by oceans? Coincidence is possible, but when you stand in the oracle chamber and feel your own voice thrum through your chest, coincidence feels less likely. From the Mediterranean, travel to the Andes. Near Lake Titicaca, shafts cut into volcanic andesite drop into darkness. Andesite is harder than granite, yet these holes are smooth and circular, as if drilled with colossal cores. Archaeologists often call them unfinished quarries. Local legends disagree. They say the shafts connect to tunnels that run beneath the mountains, leading to hidden cities, even to Paititi, the fabled lost Inca capital. The region is full of mystery. Puerta de Hayumarca, the Gate of the Gods, is a stone doorway carved into a cliff face. It leads nowhere, yet local myths insist it once opened to other realms. Near it, more shafts descend into rock, their purpose unknown. Were they attempts to quarry stone, or parts of a network whose meaning is now gone? Lake Titicaca itself holds its own secrets. The Incas said their ancestors emerged from its waters, guided by the sun god. In modern times, divers have found ruins beneath the lake, terraces, walls, even roads, evidence of settlements drowned long ago. It's tempting to imagine those underwater ruins linked to the shafts nearby, as if they were once part of a network, now fragmented by flood and time. No one has mapped them fully. The dark water hides more than it shows. Farther east, in India, underground precision takes a different form. At Ellora, builders carved downward, not upward, removing hundreds of thousands of tons of basalt to reveal the Kailasa temple. A freestanding complex emerged from solid rock. Shrines, courtyards, colonnades, all balanced and aligned. This negative architecture, creation by subtraction, requires almost unimaginable planning. One miscalculation, one crack in the wrong place, and the entire structure would collapse, yet the result is symmetrical, enduring, perfect. Nearby, the Ajanta caves tell a parallel story. Carved centuries earlier, their Buddhist halls were shaped to amplify chants. A monk reciting sutras inside would hear his voice magnified, carried to listeners, wrapped in resonance. In some halls, even a whisper travels clear across the space. Again and again, precision is not decoration but function, shaping sound, guiding experience. Finally, there is Cappadocia in Turkey, where whole cities hide beneath volcanic stone. Derinkuyu is the largest, plunging 11 levels deep. Rediscovered in 1963, when a man knocked down a wall in his home and found a tunnel, it stunned archaeologists. Tens of thousands of people could live there. There were kitchens, churches, schools, wine cellars. Animals had their own stables. The city even had massive rolling stone doors that could seal passages, turned by a single person to block entire corridors. Most remarkable are the ventilation shafts, more than 200 of them, cut so straight and true that they still provide fresh air today, some nearly 300 feet long. Without them, life below would have been impossible. Walking through Derinkuyu now, you feel not just human ingenuity, but determination bordering on obsession. Why go so deep? Defense is the common answer. Invasions drove people underground. But the scale suggests more. These were not temporary refuges, they were whole worlds, carved to last. Step back from these examples, Egypt, Malta, the Andes, India, Cappadocia, and the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Across cultures, across centuries, people poured their energy into underground works of astonishing accuracy. Shafts straighter than we can drill today, boxes smoother than glass, chambers tuned to invisible notes, cities ventilated with shafts so perfect they function centuries later. What unites them is not just precision, but intent. These were not casual excavations. They were deliberate, excessive in their care, demanding accuracy that went beyond survival. Why polish granite to tolerances finer than aircraft components for a bull's coffin? Why tune a limestone chamber to a frequency that touches the brain? Why carve andesite with circles smoother than our drills, only to abandon them? Perhaps precision itself was sacred, a way of honouring gods with perfection. Perhaps it was practical knowledge, lost to us, techniques of sound and stone rediscovered by different cultures. Or perhaps it was something in between, the sense that by carving straight lines and true corners, by shaping stone to sing, they were aligning themselves with deeper forces: earth, water, sky, mind. Standing in these places, you feel it. The silence is not empty. The stone holds intention. The underground is not absence, but presence. These works tell us our ancestors were not just surviving, but experimenting, conversing with the earth in ways we are only beginning to notice again. And that is why the mystery endures. Across continents, across millennia, they cut into the dark with a precision that still humbles us. They left behind not just structures, but questions. Questions that remain as open now as when the first explorers stumbled into them. Questions that hum with purpose, waiting for us to listen. For most of history, we entered the underground slowly. With ropes and torches, chisels and sweat, we carved our way downward step by cautious step. But in the modern age, curiosity pushed us further. We built machines to do what no human body could: drill through solid rock mile after mile, chasing knowledge into the deepest layers of the earth. And just as often as in the past, what we found was not certainty, but strangeness. On the remote Kola Peninsula in northern Russia, the Soviet Union began one of the most audacious scientific projects of the 20th century. The year was 1970, and their goal was simple to state yet monumental in ambition: to drill deeper into the earth than anyone had ever gone. They wanted to peel back the crust like pages in a book, to touch the ancient layers that had lain in silence for billions of years. At first, it seemed like a triumph of technology. The narrow borehole, barely wider than a man's hand, went deeper and deeper each year. Scientists dreamed of reaching 20 kilometers. Instead, after 2 decades, the project stalled at just over 12. But in those 12 kilometers, the Earth told a story stranger than they had expected. The textbooks predicted solid, predictable rock. What the drills brought up was different. At 3 kilometers, they found microscopic fossils, the shells of marine plants pressed into stone more than 2 billion years old. Life where none should remain. At 6 kilometers, they encountered water, not aquifers, but water released from the very rock itself, squeezed free by unimaginable pressure. At 9 kilometers, the heat spiked. Instead of the steady 100 degrees Celsius predicted, temperatures soared toward 180. The drill bits warped. Instruments failed. The deeper they went, the more unruly the Earth became. And then there were the echoes. Acoustic sensors lowered into the shaft registered strange anomalies, patterns that suggested cavities deep in the crust, hollow spaces where no geologist expected any. What those voids were, no one could agree. Some speculated about trapped gases, others about rock structures scattering sound. But the readings persisted, whispering of vast emptiness in a place that should have been only solid stone. It was around this time that the story most people remember began to spread, the so-called sounds of hell. According to rumour, Soviet engineers had lowered microphones into the borehole and captured the screams of tortured souls. Newspapers picked it up. Radio shows played supposed recordings. The story flashed across borders and languages, finding eager audiences in an age already haunted by Cold War anxieties. Later it was revealed to be a fabrication. The audio clips came from a horror film soundtrack spliced and distorted. No screams had ever been heard, but perhaps what's more interesting than the hoax itself is why it spread so fast and why so many believed it. Maybe it's because drilling 12 kilometers into the crust feels like trespass. The ancients told stories of underworlds, places of the dead, realms below. To hear that humans had made a hole deeper than the ocean is to feel those stories stir again. Perhaps at some level people wanted to believe that voices rose from the deep, not because it was true, but because it fit the old pattern. The earth is not silent, and when you pierce it, you wake what sleeps there. The irony is that no hoax was necessary. The real discoveries were already enough to unsettle. Fossils where they shouldn't be. Water where it couldn't exist. Heat far greater than expected. Voids that echoed with mystery. The Kola borehole was a scientific achievement, but also a reminder. The more we probe, the stranger the ground beneath us becomes. Eventually the project was abandoned. The official explanation was technical and financial. The heat was too high, the equipment failed, the budget ran out. But in closing the borehole, they also left the questions unanswered. Today, the rusting towers of the Kola Superdeep stand silent, the shaft capped, its depths sealed. 7.5 miles of human curiosity locked away, as if the Earth itself had reminded us of a boundary. Thousands of miles east, another hole opened not by design but by collapse. In the Siberian wilderness, a landslide in the 1960s revealed what would become the Batagaika crater. From above, it looks like a scar across the land, a gash that grows larger each year as melting permafrost yields to gravity. Local people gave it another name, the doorway to the underworld. The crater is vast now, nearly 1 kilometer long and more than 100 meters deep. Each year it expands by 30 meters or more, devouring forest, swallowing soil, opening more of the frozen archive beneath. Because what Batagaika reveals is not just a chasm, but time itself. Layers of permafrost date back hundreds of thousands of years. To walk along its edge is to read history written in ice. But as with the Kola borehole, the scientific wonder comes with unease. Descending into the crater, researchers report strange acoustic effects. Instruments register infrasound, vibrations below the threshold of human hearing, but strong enough for the body to feel. Prolonged exposure to infrasound can cause anxiety, nausea, even hallucinations. Imagine standing in a canyon that hums just beyond your ears, your body tense for reasons you cannot name. It is easy to understand why the Yakut people avoided the place, why shamans warned it was a prison for something ancient. And then there are the things that emerge from its icy walls, mammoths with fur intact, musk oxen frozen in mid-stride, even a foal, perfectly preserved, soft tissues still pliable after 40,000 years. These are not fossils, they are creatures carried forward through time, released only when the ice let go. To see them tumble into daylight is to feel the line between past and present blur. It is not resurrection, but it feels close. The Yakut belief that the crater is a doorway may not match the language of science, but it expresses the same unease. Something about the Batagaika crater does feel like an opening, a threshold. Whether what comes through is knowledge, creatures, or only the uncanny sensation of the Earth's breath, the effect is the same. It reminds us that the ground beneath us is not as still as we imagine. And then, far away in the Nevada desert, there is another hole, quieter, but just as strange. Devil's Hole is small compared to the Siberian chasm, just a still pool of blue water hidden in the rocks. Yet its mystery is just as deep. We already know its story of tragedy, how two divers in 1965 entered its depths and never returned. But the strangeness goes further. In 2022, seismic studies revealed that Devil's Hole connects to a vast underwater cave system stretching far beyond the reach of instruments. No one has yet found its end. The water within remains at a constant 33 degrees Celsius, unaffected by the burning desert sun or the coolness of night. There is no clear source of heat, no obvious flow of water. It is as though the pool keeps its own counsel, isolated from the world above. And Devil's Hole has another secret. Within its waters lives a species found nowhere else on Earth, the Devil's Hole pupfish. Barely an inch long, shimmering blue in the dim light, it is one of the rarest fish in the world. How such a delicate species survived in such an isolated, unstable environment is a mystery of its own. Scientists study it for clues about adaptation, but the symbolism lingers. Life, fragile and unique, surviving in a pool that seems bottomless. It feels almost like a signature, as if the Earth left a token there to remind us that mystery is not empty, but alive. For the Timbisha Shoshone, none of this is new. Their traditions have long warned against approaching Devil's Hole. They call it a doorway, though they rarely say to where. Sometimes caution is explanation enough. Set these stories side by side, the borehole in Russia, the crater in Siberia, the pool in Nevada, and a pattern emerges. Each began as a pursuit of knowledge, whether by science or by accident. Each revealed anomalies, fossils where none should be, infrasound that unsettles the body, water that defies explanation, creatures preserved beyond time, fish surviving in impossible conditions, and around each, myths rose up, screams from hell, the doorway to the underworld, the forbidden pool. It is tempting to dismiss the myths and focus on the data, but maybe the two belong together. Maybe the myths are how people felt the anomalies before instruments measured them. When the Soviets drilled 7 miles down, people imagined voices. When the Yakut stood at the crater's edge, they felt the earth breathe. When the Shoshone avoided the pool, they sensed what modern scanners later confirmed: it does not end. Perhaps science and myth are not enemies here, but partners, two ways of describing the same unease. The language differs, but the truth may be shared. The deep earth is not inert. It hums, it shifts, it surprises. It reminds us that beneath our feet lies not just stone but thresholds. And when we cross them, the rules we rely on, gravity, time, predictability, begin to bend. So we are left with questions. What lies in the voids beneath the Kola borehole? Why does the Batagaika crater sing with infrasound and release animals perfectly preserved? How does Devil's Hole keep its water warm and its fish alive in a cave system without end? These may be geological puzzles soluble one day with enough research, or they may be reminders of something older, something our ancestors expressed in myth, that not all thresholds are meant to be crossed. And perhaps the real mystery is not what is down there, but why we keep trying to find out. Because again and again, from ancient shafts to modern drills, from sacred cenotes to scientific boreholes, we push downward. We reach for the silence, and it answers us with anomalies. We go in search of certainty, and the earth gives us riddles instead. From the very beginning, humans have understood that the ground can open suddenly, that water and air and sound can behave strangely when funneled through the hidden spaces below. But what's remarkable is how often different cultures, separated by oceans and centuries, not only noticed these places but came to the same conclusion about them. They were not ordinary. Some were mouths to other worlds, some were dangerous thresholds, some were marked with silence, others with offerings, and in each case the message was the same: caution. In the limestone plains of the Yucatan, the Maya built their cities above a world of water. Beneath the jungle canopy lay thousands of cenotes. Sinkholes formed when the limestone collapsed and exposed the aquifers below. Most cenotes were simply wells, sources of precious water in a hot land. But a few were set apart. They were perfectly circular, their sides sheer, their depths seemingly without end. These the Maya treated with awe and dread. The most famous is the sacred cenote at Chichen Itza. From above, it looks like a giant emerald set into the forest. The water is green and still, its surface 70 feet below the rim. For centuries it was used as a place of sacrifice. Archaeologists dredging its depths have pulled up gold discs, jade beads, obsidian knives, and the bones of men, women, and children. Some bones bear cut marks suggesting ritual killing. Others show signs of drowning. The offerings were not haphazard, they were deliberate, repeated over generations. For the Maya, the cenote was a portal to Xibalba, the watery underworld ruled by gods of death and rebirth. To throw treasure into it was to send gifts to those gods. To throw people into it was to send messengers. Imagine the scene centuries ago: torches flickering at the rim, drums echoing through the jungle, priests chanting as bodies and jewels alike tumbled into the dark. The act only makes sense if you believe the water leads somewhere, that the silence swallows but also delivers. And what's curious is that not all cenotes were treated this way. Many were used daily, without ceremony. Only certain ones, usually round and deep and strangely resonant, were chosen for sacrifice. Why those? Today, divers report that some cenotes distort sound, making voices seem to come from unexpected directions. Sonar sometimes suggests chambers that vanish when approached. Perhaps the Maya noticed the same unsettling qualities and marked them as sacred. Their choice hints that they too sensed anomalies long before instruments confirmed them. Across the ocean, in Egypt, another kind of caution took form, not in offerings, but in silence. The Osiris shaft beneath the Giza Plateau drops more than 100 feet into the bedrock, perfectly straight, with landings at intervals. At the bottom lies a chamber filled with still water. Engineers marvel at its precision, but what strikes historians is its absence from the record. The Egyptians documented nearly everything: rituals, construction, offerings, even the tools they used, but nowhere in hieroglyphic texts is the Osiris shaft mentioned. Not once. That silence is itself a form of reverence. To build something so exact and then erase it from writing suggests taboo, perhaps only initiates new of it. Perhaps it was linked to rituals too secret to record, or perhaps it was considered dangerous, an entrance best left unnamed. Whatever the reason, the absence is striking. In a culture obsessed with memory, the shaft was deliberately forgotten. To walk past it and never speak of it, that was their offering. Imagine the plateau in its prime. The pyramids rise above, gleaming in the sun. Priests pass the opening of the shaft but avert their eyes. Workers know it is there but do not speak of it. Inscriptions bloom on every other surface, but here silence. It is as though the shaft existed in two worlds, one of stone and one of secrecy. Further south and east, in Australia, oral traditions carry warnings of their own. Aboriginal peoples speak of certain holes in the land that breathe. Air moves through them in pulses, sometimes with sound, sometimes with a hum. Children are taught to avoid them, to give them space. The stories link these places to the dream time, the deep mythic past when ancestral beings shaped the land. What's remarkable is how long these oral traditions endure. Some Aboriginal stories describe rising seas that swallowed coastlines more than 10,000 years ago, memories now confirmed by geology. If those stories could preserve ancient shorelines, then their warnings about breathing holes may be just as old, passed down because they were useful. Scientists know that caves and fissures can act like lungs, exhaling air as pressure shifts. Some produce infrasound, vibrations below hearing that still affect the body. To a community living close to the land, the sensation of a breathing hole would not be abstract. It would be felt in the skin, in the bones. And so the warning persisted. Do not linger here. Respect the breath of the earth. Thousands of miles north in Siberia, the Yakut people look at the Batagaika crater and see not geology, but a prison. To them, the widening scar is not simply permafrost collapse, but the release of something sealed away before the ice came. Shamans warn against approaching it. Locals speak of it with dread, and when scientists descend, their instruments measure infrasound that unsettles the body. Their eyes see mammoths and musk oxen sliding from the walls. Their hands touch ice that has not melted in 40,000 years. The Yakut did not need instruments to feel what the scientists confirm. This is a place where the earth itself seems alive, restless, even dangerous. Consider the parallels. The Maya cast offerings into certain cenotes. The Egyptians built shafts and erased them from memory. Aboriginal Australians told children to avoid breathing earth. The Yakut refused to approach a growing scar. Different cultures, never in contact, arrived at the same gesture: caution, reverence, distance. It might be tempting to dismiss this as coincidence, a universal human instinct to fear the unknown. But the details complicate that. The Maya chose specific cenotes, ones we now know are unusual acoustically. The Egyptians ignored one shaft while celebrating others. The Aboriginal stories describe real geological effects. The Yakut warnings align with scientific data on infrasound. Again and again, the myths and the anomalies overlap. Perhaps myth is not fantasy here, but another form of noticing. When a Maya priest called the cenote a doorway, he was describing the same unease a modern diver feels when sonar shows chambers that vanish. When Egyptians chose silence, they were marking the shaft as exceptional, in the same way we now measure its impossible precision. When Aboriginal elders said the earth breathes, they were feeling the same air pressure shifts a geologist records. When Yakut shamans warned of imprisonment, they were sensing the same uncanniness scientists report in the crater. And perhaps their responses, offerings, silence, avoidance, were wiser than ours. Modern science rushes to probe, to measure, to conquer anomalies with data. But the ancient response was to step back, to live alongside mystery rather than dissolve it, to respect thresholds instead of crossing them blindly. Picture the scenes together. A Maya procession at the rim of a cenote, smoke curling upward as treasure falls into black water. An Egyptian priest walking past a shaft and never speaking its name. An Aboriginal elder teaching children to avoid a place where the ground exhales. A Yakut shaman turning away from a widening scar. Different lands, different centuries, but the same posture: recognition, caution, respect. And what strikes me is how much this rhymes with our present. When divers report impossible spaces, the cenote is closed. When scans suggest hidden rooms, the hypogeum is sealed. When radar shows tunnels beyond the tourist map, the gates at Derinkuyu lock. We too choose caution. We use fences and permits instead of ritual and taboo, but the instinct is identical. We too sense thresholds. Maybe that's what these ancient stories are telling us. That mystery itself is part of the world's fabric. That some places are meant to unsettle us, to remind us of limits, and that the wisest response is not always to push through, but sometimes to bow, to pause, to let the threshold remain intact. Because across continents and centuries the lesson is the same. Some holes are not just holes, they are mouths, doorways, passages, and thresholds, then as now, demand respect. We like to think we're different from the people who came before us. We have scanners that see through stone, satellites that measure heat in the dark, instruments that listen to frequencies our ears can't hear. We carry our curiosity in wires and lenses, and yet, when we stand at the edge of certain holes, we do something very old. We step back. The language changes. Permits, safety, conservation, liability. But the gesture is the same as it was for the Maya, the Egyptians, the elders in the outback. We draw a line and say, not here, not any deeper. The pattern is easy to miss when you look at each site alone. A closure is always practical in its paperwork. A staircase is unstable. A ceiling flakes at the corners. The CO2 is higher than recommended. The humidity too persistent. The risk assessment too blunt. But stack the decisions side by side and a different shape appears. Like seeing constellations where before there were only bright points. It's not just that places close, it's when they close, after the moment a new instrument shows something unexpected. On an island in the Mediterranean, a stone labyrinth descends under modern streets. Only a few rooms are lit for visitors. The rest slip off into the cool, the air heavy with age. If you stand very still in one chamber and speak a single syllable, you can feel it rise in your ribs and pass into the walls. That resonance is easy enough to measure. What's harder to translate is what people feel there, how a voice becomes bigger than the mouth that made it. For a long time, that chamber drew small groups, the curious, the respectful, the lucky. Then scans were run, non-invasive, harmless. Just a way of seeing whether any passages lay behind rock that had long appeared solid. Afterwards, something in the lower levels went still. Tours were narrowed. A new phrase appeared on signs and in emails, structural concerns. And if you asked the docents what the scans found, they would shrug in a practiced way as if to say, even if we knew, what would knowing change? In Central America, freshwater windows open in the limestone like coins dropped into a field. Some of them are ordinary. People draw water, children swim, others are not ordinary, though nothing marks them as special but the feeling on your skin. The way sound moves across the surface, the depth that seems to disappear into a softness richer than water should be. Experienced divers have a different vocabulary for danger. They feel it in the way silt holds its breath, in the slight quickening of their own. There were surveys, then revisits, then stories, sonar that showed a chamber and then did not, a corridor that appeared on a digital map and then folded into blankness when the team swam toward it. A few sites closed, quietly, no scandal, just a rope and a notice, not today. In a high country of stone where whole cities were carved underground, there were once tours that moved easily through an open warren, shallow levels for school groups and deeper levels for those who didn't mind the narrow. Then a film crew arrived with instruments designed to see beyond the tourist map, to tease out the pale threads tunnels make when you look at them as a system rather than a sequence. They had permissions, escorts, a schedule marked with optimism. The instruments did their work and returned their pictures, single-frame truths that, when laid together, suggested a continuation beyond the accepted endpoint. Not a chamber so much as a direction. After that, the orders came down in a tone that remembered the old language of governors and prefects. Doors that had been open for years were locked, level markers covered, the descent redrawn as a shorter story. In the desert near the River of Kings, a shaft dropped straight through bedrock. The last team permitted to work there went in with caution and a little audacity, because that is the way of anyone who agrees to lower themselves into a tight place. The water at the bottom resisted them. It held a flatness that made light seem farther than they were. The divers' instruments were patient in that way only machines can be. Pings sent downward, maps built from echoes, a silhouette of the unseen drawn from nothing but time. The image that came back was not a picture you could hold up in a press conference. It was something smaller and harder to handle, a density where there should be none, a complexity in the floor. If you listened closely to the language used later, you could hear something metallic in it. Not proof, not even claim, just the odour of a word held behind the teeth. Then came another old decision in modern clothes. Let the water keep its quiet. Lock the grate. If you trace these closures on a map, the line zigzags wildly. Malta, Central America, Anatolia, Egypt. But the motion is familiar. Each site reaches a moment when measurement stops feeling like a neutral act and starts to feel like intrusion. Up to a point, every instrument is welcomed. Past that point, the same instrument becomes the reason to slow down. It's not quite conspiracy, not quite fear, it's something closer to instinct. The way you look at a sleeping animal and decide that your desire to see it breathe is less important than its need to rest. The surprises aren't limited to locks and signs. High above us, satellites wrap the world in permanent dusk. They see heat where our eyes see only night. When their images are stitched together and tuned, certain places show as warmer than their neighbours. Sometimes the reason is obvious: a spring, a vent, a shallow seam of warmth under thin ground. But the list of obvious reasons is short, and the list of sights is not. A shaft inside a plateau glows a degree above its setting. A ring of water in a forest returns numbers that fit better with summer than with the shoulder of winter it was photographed in. The quiet mouth of an old descent shows as a pulse rather than a point. You can explain each instance if you want. Air moves, moisture gathers, bacteria heat what they eat. Taken singly, the stories behave. Taken together, they begin to hum. You could say the same about sound. There are rooms where a whisper seems to stand up straight. There are pools where the slap of a palm would ring beyond the shape of the hand that made it. There are places where the earth itself appears to hold a note. It isn't a mystical claim to say so, it's a measurement. The question is not whether the note exists, but why certain places hold it so well, and why, after confirming that fact, we so often decide to close the door. To be fair to the present, closures are not only about mystery. Stone is patient with time and impatient with people. The breath of crowds changes a chamber's skin. A rope brushed too often begins to carve its own line in the dark. Insurance policies are an unromantic genre, and the deep earth is hard to insure. For every rumour of the hidden, there are 3 memos about tile fragments and air quality. The people who sign their names at the bottom of those memos are not villains. They are doing what we all do when we feel the weight of responsibility. We pick the smaller regret. Better to tell a story with an incomplete map than to tell no story at all. And yet, there is a particular kind of no that arrives after a yes, and it has a flavour even paperwork can't disguise. You can hear it in the way guides speak of rooms they used to enter, in how they finish a sentence before the word they want appears, the way a diver tells you about a corridor by describing the turn that happens before it. You can feel it in the sudden neatness of a fence where the rest of the site is messy, as if tidiness itself were a clue. None of that proves anything except that people notice. But people noticing is where most true stories begin. Ask the people who go anyway. The cavers, the climbers, the ones who memorize a cave's voice by how their boots answer it. Their lists are long and composed almost entirely of small things. Lights that dim a little early, gauges that develop a heartbeat, a camera whose file structure swims, not lost but rearranged, like fish moving when a larger thing rolls past. They'll tell you the difference between fear and warning. Fear is what you bring down the rope with you. Warning is what's already waiting. When they say a place warned them, they are not being poetic. They are saying the air changed its mind. The same story repeats in water. There are shafts so clear they look shallow until the body enters and discovers depth arranged like a folded city. There are lines divers tie for a return route that curve a little when the silt begins to move, as if the space itself breathes. There are currents that exist for the length of a body and then disappear. The divers come back to the surface with eyes that know something they don't have words for yet. They write their reports carefully. They keep the softest part of what they felt separate from the words. And when a rope appears across a favourite entrance a month later, they roll it up in the same file where they keep those words they didn't use. It would be easy to take all this and frame it as a single story. They don't want you to know, but that sentence is too narrow for what's actually happening. A better sentence might be, we are learning where our questions disturb the very thing we want to understand. The modern world is not conspiring so much as repeating, finding that the edge our ancestors marked with offerings or silence is still the edge. The costumes have changed, the play has not. There's another pattern worth noticing. The sites that trouble our instruments most are often the same ones that troubled older languages. The breathing places of coastal stone, the round pools the Maya treated as mouths, the descents the Egyptians refused to name, the crater the Yakut won't approach. It is possible to say that this overlap is just that, an overlap. It is also possible to say that humans across time have been doing the same work in different dialects, measuring with ritual, measuring with silence, measuring with sound, measuring with heat, and that the agreement between those dialects is itself a kind of data. Consider a satellite image taken on a cold night. The plateau is black-blue with stored darkness. A small square brightens by a fraction. It's nothing you would notice if you weren't hunting for changes too slight for the eye. A week later, another pass shows the same bright fraction. Not brighter, not dimmer. A month, a season. The square persists. It is boring in the way interesting things often are. Someone writes a note, saves a copy, attaches an explanation about airflow. The explanation might be right. It might also be the thing we say when we recognize a pattern and don't yet know how to hold it. Or take a recording made in a chamber where people have been speaking carefully for 5,000 years. The instrument is simple, a human mouth and a human ear, with a microphone between them to play the part of honesty. The note that fills the microphone is the same note lentils and bells and drums tend to love when they want a room to be more than a room. You can say the curve of the ceiling makes the note. You can say the limestone carries it. Both are true. Neither is complete, because people noticed this long before microphones were invented, and they tuned their lives to it. We arrive with machines and take good measurements. The measurements confirm the old choice, and then, very often, we send fewer people into the room. What are we protecting? Visitors, certainly. The stone, certainly. But there's another thing closures protect that is harder to name. If you stand inside a place that hums, there is a moment when your body begins to match it. Not the mind is a loud instrument, but the part of you that doesn't narrate only listens. In that moment you can feel why someone might have cracked a sealed jar and poured an offering into black water, why someone else might have walked past a shaft for a lifetime without ever speaking its name. If too many people feel that at once, something changes in the place. The hum grows crowded. The quiet becomes performance. The threshold is used up by crossing. A lock and a sign are ugly solutions to a delicate problem, but they accomplish what ceremony once did. They put a little distance back in. All of this is a long way of saying that the modern closures are not just bureaucratic reflexes or shadows of secrecy. They are part of a human rhythm around thresholds. Approach, measure, feel the hair rise on the arm and step back. In one century that rhythm looks like jade and children and smoke. In another it looks like scan lines and key cards. The shape is the same. So is the question hanging at the edge of it. Because if we keep finding warmth where cold should live, notes where silence should sit, depths where maps promise an end, then maybe the more honest story is not, they don't want you to know, but we're not ready to know without changing the thing we want to understand. A threshold is a living device. Use it wrong and it stops working. A door is not just a hole in a wall, it's a relationship between two rooms, and the act of passing is part of what it is. Which leaves us with a choice about how to tell the rest of this tale. One option is to stand on the fence and shout about secrets. Another is to lean into the hum and ask why precision, resonance, and warmth keep overlapping in the same places across the same ages, as if parts scattered on a floor want to be assembled. Not to claim a machine hiding underground, but to consider whether the pieces we keep finding, straight shafts, tuned rooms, impossible waters, belong to a way of thinking that saw the earth not as a lump to be tunnelled, but as an instrument to be played carefully. If that is even a little bit true, then the locks and signs aren't the end of the story. They're a pause, a breath before we decide what to do with what we've measured, and pauses have value. They keep music from turning into noise, and will keep going, of course. Curiosity is patient. It waits, and then gathers itself again. Instruments will grow gentler, better at listening without pressing. People will return to a few of the closed places with new ways of asking old questions, and the earth will answer as it always has, not with explanations, but with patterns, temperature against stone, sound against air, curves against gravity, that remind us that threshold is not a metaphor. It's a kind of place, and places, unlike theories, can choose how much of themselves to show. For now, though, it's worth noticing how much the present rhymes with the past. How often we find ourselves reenacting ceremonies we no longer remember. The rope across the path, the hush before a mouth of water, the ordinary smile of a guide who has learned the art of stopping a sentence one word shy. None of that proves anything except that humans are consistent creatures. When the ground opens and behaves in ways that make the body listen harder than the mind, we become careful again. And that care might be the most interesting part of all, because it means the mystery is doing its work. It's not just an object for us to look at, it's a force acting on us, asking us to match it or leave it alone. The closures, the fences, the sealed gates, these are answers we give when a threshold asks a question we can't quite translate. The question is simple though. It has always been the same. How deep do you really want to go? By now we've seen that the underground isn't just dark space. It's full of decisions, lines laid down with purpose, surfaces brought to a level of finish that doesn't make sense if the goal was merely to bury, to store, to hide. What threads those decisions together is precision, not the coarse usefulness of a shelter or a well, but the kind of exactness you only get when someone is chasing a particular effect. It's the difference between cutting a hole and tuning an instrument. One way to hear that difference is through sound. In certain places, a voice doesn't just echo, it changes. A single syllable can thicken in the chest and return with a steadiness that doesn't feel like a reflection so much as an answer. The hypergeum in Malta does this reliably, for some, disorientingly, at a low, steady pitch. Passage tombs in Ireland answer voice and drum with a surprising sustain. Galleries in Peru carry conch blasts in a way that makes distance hard to judge. Even outside stone, the phenomenon shows itself. Clap at the foot of a Mesoamerican pyramid, and the air sends back a bird's cry, as if the geometry were a reed. These aren't magic tricks, they're acoustics. But acoustics is exactly the point, because to make air behave this way you need geometry. Curves of particular radii, walls meeting at angles that don't waste vibration, cavities sized so standing waves have a home. You need choices. Modern labs have a vocabulary for what those choices do to us. Tones clustered around a low 100 Hz band can nudge brain activity, not in a mystical sense, but in a measurable one. Breathing slows, attention narrows, the threshold between inner and outer thins a little. You don't have to overclaim to see the implications. If a chamber's proportions were chosen so that a human voice lands naturally on such a tone, then the room is more than a room. It is a device for experience. And if builders across oceans converged on similar proportions, then the device may be a principle, discovered and rediscovered wherever stone could be shaped to hold a note. Sound isn't the only invisible line running through these places. Water moves through the story with the persistence of a theme. Sometimes it is the entire point, a cenote whose surface looks like an eye keeping secrets. Sometimes it is a surprise, a flooded floor at the bottom of a shaft where no spring should live. Sometimes it's an environment so stable it defies the desert around it, a pool that keeps its warmth in the face of cold nights and hot days, as if it were sealed from weather by something more than rock. We're comfortable with water as resource. We're less comfortable when it behaves like a component, as if its presence were necessary to complete a design. But water is a conductor of more than thirst. It carries sound, it stores heat, it transmits pressure changes instantly. Put a body of water in a tuned cavity and you have a system. A whisper above can become a push below. A drumbeat can travel around a bend. A seasonal temperature change can lag in ways that make the surface feel unearthly calm. It doesn't take mysticism to say this. It takes patience, measurement, and the humility to admit that a shaft plus a chamber, plus a stable column of water, might have been selected together because together they do something that none accomplish alone. Stone matters too, not just the shape of it, but the kind. Granite holds quartz. Limestone is a memory of the sea. Basalt is frozen fire. When you strike them with sound, they answer in different ways. Quartz does more than ring. Under pressure, it pushes a tiny bit of charge, a piezoelectric shrug that we exploit without thinking in watches and pickups and sensors. If you build a precise box out of granite, set it where vibrations are easy to feed and hard to dissipate, and then surround it with silence, you are making an instrument even if you swear you're only making a container. The mirror flatness of those granite interiors in the Saqqara galleries is overkill if you're storing meat or laying a bull to rest. It makes a different kind of sense if you're managing reflections, if any microscopic hump or hollow would spoil how energy moves inside. We're used to the idea that precision equals machine, but precision is also a property of intent. The straightness of a shaft, the flatness of a wall, the true square of a corner, these are ways of saying only this, not nearly this. And when you see those decisions made repeatedly in the dark, in rooms most people would never enter, a picture emerges that is harder to reduce to ritual space without stripping the word ritual of its complexity. Perhaps the ritual was an operation. Perhaps the operation needed exactness. Perhaps exactness was the offering because exactness unlocked the effect. There are alignments here too that we pretend we don't notice because the word alignment has been kidnapped by too many bad arguments. Still, when you map shafts, chambers, and openings across a landscape, you often discover lines that are too neat to ignore. Some point to the rising of a sun on a particular day. Others stitch hill to hill in a way that makes old footpaths look like conductors. Even the skepticism has given ground around the edges. Archaeologists are comfortable with the idea that megaliths aim at solstices. Surveyors have no problem admitting that droughts and storms run along invisible rails in the ground. Between those two comfort zones lies a question. Were the underground works arranged not only with respect to the sky, but with respect to energies that move beneath us? Water tables, faults, mineral seams that tug a compass if you let it float and look away. A fair objection arrives right here. Couldn't these be coincidences, or the result of a small fraction of impressive cases cherry-picked from a far larger set of ordinary holes? Yes, that caution is necessary. The antidote to overinterpretation is not to stop interpreting. It's to measure more carefully. When you do, something interesting happens. The precision doesn't go away. It survives closer looks. You still find axes running true, gradients that hold across distances longer than chance would predict, proportions repeating in places that never spoke to each other. You also find failures, rooms that don't sing, lines that don't match, boxes that are merely boxes. The pattern isn't perfect, but the pattern exists. There are counter-arguments at every turn, and they too deserve space in the room. A master mason with enough time can flatten a stone to a hair's breadth without a laser. Limestone caves can produce resonances by accident. Warm water can pool under rock without calling on anything but convection and a long, slow circulation loop. Some closures are exactly what their signs say: protecting visitors, preserving fragile surfaces, buying time for repairs. These are not enemies of the mystery. They are the guardrails that keep it honest. The point is not to turn every shaft into a transmitter and every chamber into a brain changer. The point is to notice that some of them behave like components, and that ancient builders acted as if they knew it. If the underground was instrument rather than void, what was it tuned for? A conservative answer is, for people. Spaces built to lift speech into chant, to smooth the breath of a crowd, to slow the pulse of a listener until a ceremony could do its work. In this reading, the technology is human physiology, and the engineering is empathy writ in stone. Give a mind the right room, and it will open. The more radical answers are harder to test but worth naming, if only to frame the edges of the conversation. Perhaps some chambers were meant to store information in a way the environment would not erase. Patterns encoded in geometry rather than in script, retrievable with sound rather than with eyes. Perhaps certain shafts and boxes were designed to couple the rhythms of the earth, seismic microtremors, groundwater surges, to materials that respond, yielding a device that listens to the planet the way a stethoscope listens to a chest. Perhaps the water wasn't just in the room, perhaps the water was the room, a standing column that turned the entire chamber into a low-frequency instrument, with human bodies as both sensors and sources. Power station is a phrase that makes serious researchers wince, and for good reason. It smuggles a whole modern category into a context that didn't have it. But if you strip the phrase of turbines and wires and keep only the idea of harvesting a steady trickle of energy, then stone, water, and pressure offer possibilities that don't need electrical metaphors to have meaning. A place that steadies temperature, that calms air, that makes sound predictable is a place where delicate processes can happen. Drying, fermenting, healing, listening, deciding. Exactness becomes function. Function becomes tradition. Tradition becomes sacred. 1,000 years later, the purpose is gone but the reverence remains, and we call what's left ritual, because we lack the manual. There is also the possibility, uncomfortable but honest, that some of these places were meant to address fears we still carry. If the underground is a threshold, perhaps the careful shaping of stone was a way to negotiate with it, to make an edge we could approach without falling in. Think of a culture that has seen the ground open, through drought, through quake, through collapse. What do you build after that? You draw a line around the danger and turn it into a room. You take the feeling of falling and give it a rhythm, a note, a curve the body can understand. You civilize the abyss not by erasing it, but by giving it form, architecture as treaty. We have small modern analogues. Anechoic chambers make silence you can hear. Concert halls take rough human noise and lift it into coherence. Sensory deprivation tanks teach people that a carefully controlled nothing becomes a very particular something within minutes. None of these are mystical. All are effects produced by geometry, material, and environment. It doesn't stretch credulity to suggest that ancient builders were also effect makers. Their tools were slower, their materials heavier, their testing cycles measured in lifetimes. But the aim, produce a repeatable human experience by shaping a place, feels recognisably modern. Where the ancient and the modern meet most clearly is in the moment instruments agree with stories. A chamber long spoken of as heavy records a pronounced low-frequency peak. A pool described as never cold returns a temperature series that barely moves over seasons. A straight drop that pulled prayers down proves truer than any plumb the surveyor carries. This agreement doesn't prove purpose. It does something subtler. It makes purpose plausible. You stop treating precision as vanity and start treating it as parameter. Skepticism, again, is the friend that keeps us from wandering too far. Some measurements are noisy, some rooms are famous because they're famous, some alignments look straight only because we love lines. But sustained attention has a way of separating romance from a repeatable fact. When a site keeps answering in the same key, sound, water, geometry reinforcing one another, you have to grant that something intentional is happening, even if the intention no longer has a name we can recover. And if intention is there, technology is there too. If we allow ourselves to define technology broadly enough to include techniques that act on bodies and attention rather than on metal and current. A tuned chamber is a tool, a precision shaft that marries air, stone, and water into a single behaviour is a tool. A granite box that refuses to be merely a container is a tool. Once you allow that, the scattered pieces we've been carrying from site to site start wanting to sit next to one another on the table. You notice that the same tolerances matter in different continents. You notice that water shows up where resonance is strongest. You notice that the rooms that sing are the rooms sealed first when traffic grows too loud. Perhaps the simplest, strangest conclusion is the one hiding in the open the whole time. Nothing here is hidden. The technology lives in the shapes. The manual is the room. The instructions are the way your voice changes when you speak, or the way your breath slows when you sit in the cool for long enough. We keep trying to read the underground the way we read books, left to right, line by line. But some knowledge isn't written, it's built. It asks you to enter and behave, and in the behaving you understand what the builders were solving. Maybe that's why so many of these places are closed now, or opened only carefully. Too much traffic erases delicate effects. A tuned room can be untuned by wear, a pool that keeps a perfect stillness, because it is lightly fed and lightly disturbed loses its character when 1,000 feet stir it. The thing that makes the place special is the very thing our curiosity threatens. We've stumbled into the paradox at the heart of every instrument. It exists to be played, but it can be ruined by playing it wrong. So we practice a slower curiosity. We take fewer measures, but we listen harder to each. We compare sites across oceans and centuries and see where the harmonies lie. We let the skeptical voice speak first and last, and in between we give the older voices a turn too. The priest who kept silence, the divers who came back changed, the elders who said the ground breathes. We don't need to choose between explanation and wonder. The best explanations preserve wonder by being honest about what we still don't know. In that honesty, a new respect appears, not for fantasies of lost super machines humming under every hill, but for the possibility that our ancestors understood certain relationships, between stone and air, water and heat, geometry and the human mind, well enough to make places where those relationships did reliable work. That's technology by any meaningful definition. We lose sight of it only because our modern definition has become too narrow to see a tuned room as a device. If that's right, then the prehistoric holes no one can explain are less like accidents, and more like components. Some were meant to sing, some were meant to steady, some were meant to be perfectly straight so gravity and pressure would behave, some were meant to hold water as if it were a string drawn taut, and some were probably just what their simplest readings say they are: pits, storerooms, refuges. Because any real pattern includes the ordinary, but enough of them are extraordinary that the question changes shape. It's no longer, could people with simple tools make this? They could, given time. It's, why did they make it like this? And again the answers point not upward to spectacle but inward to use, to experiences and effects that required the underground to be precise. Which leaves us right where a good investigation should leave us, standing at the edge of something that may be larger than the sum of its parts, with just enough evidence to keep going and just enough uncertainty to keep us careful. The holes haven't turned into machines or cathedrals or laboratories in our telling. They've revealed that those categories blur underground. A laboratory is, a cathedral is a machine when the subject is the human creature in a tuned place. From here, the story can go two ways at once. We can keep testing, mapping, modelling, treating sound and water and stone as variables in experiments the way the builders surely did, whether they used our words for it or not. And we can keep listening, treating silence, caution, and the old prohibitions as data too, because they tell us where effects were strong enough to demand respect. Between those two paths a picture will sharpen, not of magic in the ground, but of craft, subtle, cumulative, hidden in plain sight. And if we do it right, we might rediscover something more than facts. We might recover a way of paying attention that lets the underground be an instrument again. Played rarely, played well, never played to exhaustion. That's not a solution to the mystery. It's a way of staying with it, which in places like these may be the only responsible kind of answer we have. We've followed a long trail through the dark, from divers who never returned, to shafts cut straighter than modern drills, to chambers that hum in notes the body feels before the mind catches them. We've seen animals preserved for 40,000 years slide from the ice of a widening scar, fish surviving in impossible water, boxes of granite polished to tolerances our machines struggle to match. Each case on its own could be dismissed, explained or set aside. But taken together, across continents and centuries, they form a pattern too consistent to ignore. What stands out is not just that these places exist, but how people have reacted to them. Everywhere, in every age, the instinct has been the same. Treat them as thresholds, offerings at cenotes, silence around the Osiris shaft, aboriginal warnings about breathing earth, Yakut dread at the crater that grows year by year. Even now, with satellites and scanners, we still fence off certain sites, still retreat when anomalies appear, still choose not to know. It's as though the holes themselves shape human behaviour as much as we shape them. That instinct has worn many costumes. In the ancient world, it was myth. For the Maya, the cenotes were mouths of Xibalba, leading to gods of death and rebirth. In Greece, deep chasms were gates to Hades. In Norse tradition, Ginnungagap was the yawning void from which creation itself began. In Hindu cosmology, Patala was the realm beneath, home to beings not of our surface. Even the Bible speaks of pits, of Sheol, of mouths opening in the earth. Different languages, different geographies, but always the same image, the whole as a passage to elsewhere. In medieval Europe, those myths hardened into theology. The hellmouth became a staple of Gjart, a literal mouth in the ground swallowing the damned. Natural caves were sometimes bricked up as portals to infernal regions. Pilgrims treated certain shafts as holy, while others were feared as cursed. The whole was no longer just myth, it was doctrine, morality mapped onto geology. By the Enlightenment, curiosity shifted. Holes became puzzles for explorers. Travellers lowered torches into cenotes, scribbled sketches of catacombs, speculated on vast cave systems. They often returned with maps incomplete, stories half told, but the fascination remained. The Earth was seen as a labyrinth, and explorers risked themselves to chart it. Some vanished, some returned with tales of spaces too vast for explanation. It was the age of cataloguing, of naming, of trying to pin the underground to paper. The 20th century brought science in earnest. The Soviets drilled the Kola superdeep borehole and expected solid rock, only to find fossils, water, heat, and voids. Archaeologists re-entered shafts in Egypt and Malta with new instruments, only to meet resonances and anomalies. Hydrologists probed Devil's Hole and discovered a water system that refused to match known aquifers. Each step into the underground seemed to produce data that fit until it didn't. Then the old instinct appeared again. Close the door, stop the descent, let the anomaly remain anomaly. And here we are, still caught between the two impulses. Our instruments tell us more than myth ever did, but our responses look surprisingly similar. We map, we measure, we marvel, and then we hesitate. The underground remains a threshold, not an archive we can simply file. Modern science has, however, revealed something our ancestors only intuited. The underground is alive, not with demons or gods, but with life itself. Microbial colonies thrive miles beneath the surface, feeding on stone, exchanging energy in ways alien to us. The deep biosphere may hold more mass than all surface life combined. In other words, there is a hidden ecosystem beneath our feet, older and stranger than anything on the surface. When myths spoke of underworlds, they may not have been wrong in essence. There really are worlds below, teeming with beings that never see light. New tools keep peeling back layers. Muon tomography, a technique using cosmic particles, has revealed hidden chambers inside pyramids, spaces no human has entered in thousands of years. Ground-penetrating radar has traced tunnels beneath Cappadocia and Chichen Itza that stretch beyond what excavation has confirmed. Sonar maps are notes that split into impossible caverns, some still unentered by divers. Each new method confirms that what we see is only a fraction of what exists. The underground holds more void than stone, more passage than blockage. This frontier is not just physical, but conceptual. If microbes live miles down, if water circulates in systems cut off for millions of years, if voids stretch farther than drills can follow, then the Earth itself is less like a rock and more like an organism. It has circulation, respiration, memory. Myths of breathing holes, of imprisoned beings, of thresholds to other realms take on a new resonance when we recognize that the planet is dynamic below, not inert. And so speculation begins. Some theories suggest these shafts and chambers were survival structures, carved as refugees during ancient cataclysms. Derinkuyu could house tens of thousands. Cenotes could provide water even in drought. Precision shafts might have doubled as ventilation or communication systems. In this view, the underground was humanity's first bunker. Others suggest they were instruments, designed to change consciousness. The resonance chambers, the frequencies tuned to the brain, the darkness and silence, all of these could alter perception. Perhaps ceremonies underground were not about worshipping gods, but about reshaping the human mind, guiding vision, producing revelation. Technology, in this sense, was psychological, not mechanical. A third possibility is more daring, that these were devices to engage with the Earth itself. Granite boxes rich in quartz, shafts filled with water, alignments across landscapes. Together they may have formed a network tuned to vibrations and flows we don't yet measure. Whether you call them energy stations, communication devices, or simply unknown tools, the suggestion is the same. The precision had purpose. And then there is the idea of memory. What if the holes were built to last not as monuments but as reminders, to survive fire, flood, and time, to carry forward knowledge in a form no parchment or tablet could, geometry as archive, resonance as message. A perfectly straight shaft or a chamber that hums might not hold words, but it might hold something more universal, an experience, one that any human, thousands of years later, could still enter and still feel. Which theory is true? Perhaps none. Perhaps all in part. Perhaps the truth is simpler, that humans, faced with the abyss, cannot help but shape it, make it meaningful, give it edges and notes and stories. Precision in that sense is our way of negotiating with fear. We cannot abide a random void, so we carve it into a pattern. In doing so, we create places that outlast us, that puzzle our descendants, that whisper the same question across ages. What were they for? And maybe that is the real function. Not to solve a problem, not to hold a body, not to generate power, but to keep us wondering, to remind us that not everything is surface, not everything is sky, to teach us that the deep earth is part of the human story, even if it resists being read. So what do we carry away from this? That our ancestors, whether Maya or Egyptian, Aboriginal or Yakut, Maltese or Andean, all felt the same pull, that they responded with offerings, with silence, with warnings, with architecture. That we too, with our satellites and sensors, still feel it. We call it anomaly, we call it risk, but it is the same recognition. Thresholds exist. And thresholds by their nature do not resolve, they remain, they wait. Perhaps the underground was never meant to give us answers. Perhaps it was meant to give us questions, to keep curiosity alive across generations. If so, then it has succeeded. We are still here, still staring into the shafts, still listening to the hum, still imagining what lies beyond the dark. The greatest secrets of humanity may not lie in the stars above us, but in the prehistoric holes beneath our feet. Not as solutions to be solved, but as invitations to remember that mystery itself is part of the world's design. The holes endure silent and patient, waiting for us to approach again, not to conquer them, but to listen. Thank you for watching.